I refused to give my dream house money to my brother, exposing his gambling losses and my parents' manipulation. Still, I helped secure a house legally under his wife's name, then moved forward with my life. Ever since I was a child, I was obsessed with the idea of owning properties and designing houses. That passion led me to become an architect, and I'm proud to say I'm doing quite well for myself these days. My journey into property ownership began a long time ago in Germany, where I bought my first duplex. I still rent out both parts of that place. Today, I also own 2 houses in Italy and 1 in Spain. 2 of those are rented out as holiday homes most of the year, while the last one has become my own vacation base. I even rent out a room there to a good friend. All these properties bring in a solid stream of passive income, though that only came after years of hard work, endless investments, and non-stop refurbishing projects. Right now, I'm actually renting an apartment in Nick because my job relocated me here temporarily. My older brother, who is 48, only has an apartment. He's got a family with 2 kids and his wife, and he are now on the hunt for a house spacious enough for all of them. They've actually found their dream house, but unfortunately, it's just way out of budget for them. Meanwhile, things are moving quickly for my wife and me. We're about to buy our 5th house, this one in France. It'll be the biggest purchase we've made so far. The kind of house I can see us retiring in. It's an incredible deal, huge, gorgeous, and everything we want. I was excited enough to share the news with my family during a FaceTime call with my siblings and parents. At first, everyone seemed thrilled for me. Then my brother chimed in and said he needed a bigger home for his family. He suggested that I should give up on buying my dream house in France, hand him the money, and said, and maybe even pigeon for refurbishing the home he wanted. I thought he was joking, so I just laughed and flat out said, "No way, that was apparently a huge mistake." Suddenly, the entire mood of the call shifted. My whole family turned on me in an instant, taking turns parading me as if it was somehow my duty to buy my brother a house. After 10 exhausting minutes of non-stop guilt tripping, I finally told them I'd think about just to get them off my back and hung up. I admit I can be a bit of a pushover. Later on, I spoke it over with my wife and we agreed on a potential solution. We could wait to buy their house for them and rent it out at no profit just to help them out. When I told my brother about this idea, he was insulted at the suggestion of having his younger brother as a landlord. My parents then piled on saying I should simply hand my brother all the money we'd saved for our house in France, no strings attached. That was the last straw. I told them all in no uncertain terms to go away. Then I started moving forward with the paperwork for our dream property in France, determined not to let anyone guilt me out of it. Some of my friends have since told me I should put family first and that it's not like my wife and I are struggling for money. But after everything I've invested to build this life, I can't understand how they think I should just give it all away, not for a good cause, but just to make things easy for my brother. Still, it sometimes makes me wonder how much of a difference I actually make in the larger landscape of real estate and design. It's a bit daunting to think about since this is my passion and my livelihood. Every property I've worked on has been personally designed and refurbished by me, and I go out of my way to source materials and labor locally whenever possible. I was once told that the road to success is paved with moral ambiguity. That phrase has stuck with me because it perfectly encapsulates the conflict. I feel we live in a world that celebrates success, but rarely questions the methods used to achieve it. It's tough sometimes to balance ambition with morality, especially when the lines start to blur in your own family. Opti who? My wife and I have been through quite a whirlwind this past month, and I feel like I owe a bit of an update after the clarity I've gained. Honestly, sharing all of this feels almost therapeutic for me. Things got a lot wilder than I ever expected. Not long after I spoke with my friend, and thanks to all the honest advice flying my way, New York's pandemic situation worsened, and I found myself back in Spain. It was there I realized I'd made the right choice about everything. My wife and I decided to move forward with a house in France. We both saw how much sense it made. We also made a big leap and decided to sell the 2 homes we owned in Italy. We hadn't visited them in ages. They were just being rented out. The decision had 2 motives. I couldn't get some of the thoughtful remarks I'd received out of my head, and we figured some liquidity couldn't hurt with the way the economy was heading. For the sale, we decided to only list the homes with local real estate companies. And then there's the saga with my brother, which turned out to be more complicated than I first thought. About a week after all this started, his wife called me asking if I would reconsider helping them out. That call turned everything sideways. There was a real reason for his request, but apparently my brother hadn't wanted to tell me the truth. I made it clear to her either he came clean himself or there was no point in discussing anything further. A week later, my brother finally called me. He laid everything on the table. Turns out he had developed a gambling problem over the past 2 years and had gambled away a noticeable percentage of their savings. Not a majority, but significant, less than 40%, but more than 15%, as he put it. That dream house they wanted was now even further out of reach than ever. Apparently, he's been in therapy for his addiction for 4 months, but the financial hole he dug was deep. What floored me even more was learning that my parents had known everything from the beginning. I'd known my brother was having marital troubles a couple years back, but they were always so secretive. I never pried. Now I know the core of the problem. On top of that, my parents had urged him to ask me for a larger sum, hoping I'd at least compromise and agree to help with a smaller amount. When I confronted them, the conversation went brutally honest and harsh. They actually believe I owe the family that it's more their money than mine, just because they raised me. That opened a whole other can of worms for me. I did tell my brother about how I'd been thinking about all of this, and he was angry at first, but after talking it out and considering everything, he understood. After a tough discussion, I made him an offer he could rent the house at cost, and once he rebuilt his savings, I'd sell the house to him and deduct the rent he'd paid from the sale price as close to a rent-to-own deal as possible. Some people had suggested the solution, and it felt right. He gladly accepted. So that's where things stand today. I'm really hoping once the pandemic is behind us, we can all get together, share a good laugh, and leave this chaos in the past. Opti, free. A lot of people seem worried about the legal side of things. Don't worry. I got my lawyer drafting everything up. Everything will be in writing. But honestly, for me, this isn't just about the paperwork. My drive behind all this comes from a much deeper place. Growing up, my brother and I watched our own father struggle with a gambling addiction. I've seen up close what gambling can do to a family and realized just how much stability those kids need. This is about more than just finances. For me. Looking back, the last 2 years have been a total whirlwind out of really. Of course, the pandemic threw a wrench in everything, but my brother's actions didn't help either. It all came to a head when we decided to sell our business to a firm in Germany. Even though we managed to make a profit in the end, the pandemic made it nearly impossible to set up our sourcing. The projects dried up, and when we finally got a decent offer, we pulled the plug. Since then, I haven't been doing much, just exploring my options and figuring out what's next. But before we made that sale, life at home blew up. My brother and his wife got divorced, my parents followed suit. I always knew my father had struggled with gambling, but I could never wrap my head around how my mom reacted to all of it. It turns out there was a lot I didn't know. As a child, I didn't realize that my mother forced my father to hand over his entire paycheck, and sometimes even more than that. When the money wasn't enough, she actually suggested he try gambling. She's always put herself on a moral pedestal. So discover and she encouraged his gambling was absolutely insane to me. The reality is, she's been incredibly financially abusive for years. They almost divorced before, but she eased up, and my father thought she'd changed for the better. But good things never last. When my brother started working, she began demanding money from him too. Even worse, she used me as an example, claiming I'd been sending her money and that my success was inspired by my need to provide for both myself and her. The truth is, I moved abroad when I was young, so my relationship with my brother was always a bit distant, and I had no idea what she was doing to him. She pushed him towards gambling, and he tumbled straight into the trap. After the situation with the house, he managed to stop for a few months, but quickly relapsed. He switched from local gambling machines to buying prepaid cards so he could gamble online. My father claims he didn't know any of this was happening, but he certainly didn't complain about the vacations paid for by a stay-at-home wife or the pressure he put on me to buy him a house. When he finally filed for divorce, I found it hard to lay all the blame on my mother. I held him equally accountable. My brother's wife filed for divorce not long after everything came to light. It was only after my father filed that he told his wife about everything our mom had done. I reached out to him wanting to support him, but his response was to tell me to go away and never speak to him again. Now he's with his girlfriend, and according to his ex-wife, still gambling. His wife is still living in their house. We stopped making payments, but I don't want to impact her finances any more than necessary. At least the mortgage rates are cheap. As for me, I cut contact with both my father and mother. My brother, for his own reasons, has cut contact with me. I almost believe my father divorced my mother, hoping that I would take him in. Now I'm settled into a new house in France. I may not be a fan of French people, but in a way I brought this on myself by choosing to live here. My wife, on the other hand, is absolutely thriving in our new and rather odd life. I spend most of my time in my workshop or just browsing online. I can't help but feel that a mix of boredom, the lingering pandemic, and my complete loss of trust in my family has left me somewhat jaded and disenchanted. For the past year, ever since we sold the company, I've debated sharing what's been happening. But I kept waiting for some unexpected twist or some good news to close this chapter on a high note. But that moment never came. Looking back on my earlier thoughts, I realize I was so focused on my own problems, seeing everything as just another trial life threw at me. Now I see things differently. Sometimes you're just a supporting character in someone else's drama. And a lot of what we call success is really just being in the right place at the right time. Anyway, that's where things stand. Sorry for going a bit off on a tangent, but this is the reality I'm living now. Update 4. Quiet didn't last long. 2 months ago, a registered letter from the note terror landed on our doorstep like a brick wrapped in twine. Apparently, the east wing of our house came with a droid usage to habitation attached to it, lifetime right of use reserved to the previous owner's aunt. It was there in the acti, buried in a paragraph I skimmed because I was so giddy about the garden and the stone stairs. In practice, it meant a 91-year-old woman named Odette was entitled to live in 2 rooms and use the kitchen selling less conventees. The notaire wrote it like I'd won an heirloom cat. 3 days later, a taxi pulled up, and out came Odette in a navy coat, a scar on her chin like a comma, and a suitcase with a ribbon tied to the handle as if she had just returned from 1968. It should have been a disaster. It wasn't. She walked in, nodded at the beams, and told me the half wall in the salon was illegal, built in the A's Parancon, and that if we removed it, the room would breathe again. I've worked with structural engineers who speak in millimeters. She waved a stake and was right to within a finger. She'd been a seamstress, and it turns out a life spent painting seams trains her eye. My wife fell in love with her immediately. I pretended to grumble, and then knocked down the half wall on a Saturday morning while Odette made coffee like medicine. There was more. In the granary behind a packing crate left by the previous owner, she pointed to a plank that overlooked old nails in a new pattern. We pried it up and found a low crawl space no one had touched in decades. Dry as a bone, it held a tin trunk with postcards, ration cards, a rolled set of the original plastering elevations for the main staircase, and a pencil plan of the house from 1894 with notes in violet ink. Not treasure, but close enough for me. I spent a week flattening the drawings under books in my workshop, feeling my jaw and clench for the first time in months. I don't know how else to explain it, but having a stranger know your house better than you do forces a kind of humility I haven't allowed myself in a while. Parallel to Odette becoming a fixture, she shuffles around in slippers and insults our olive oil. The situation back home finally boiled over. My sister-in-law called me in tears. I'd known the payments had gone sideways. What I didn't know was that the bank had started the search. There's a particular tone bags take when they smell blood. It's almost polite. I flew in and sat with a man in a gray tie who kept saying policy as if that word were a door he could close in my face. We spent 2 days in offices that all looked like they'd been cleaned of personality. In the end, we found a path. I bought the note at a discount with the condition the loan be rewritten solely in my sister-in-law's name. Fixed modest rate, no balloon. My brother had to sign a renunciation of all claim to the property. He would get a lump sum equal to the equity he'd actually put in. No fantasies, no future cuts, clean break. I told him to meet us at the notary. He showed up 40 minutes late smelling like aftershave and cheap whiskey and tried to turn the waiting room into a stage. He demanded fairness, shouted that I was stealing his house, said the kids would hate me. I told him quietly that he hadn't paid €1 in a year and I was done letting his chaos flatten everyone else's life. It wasn't a moral speech, just a boundary drawn with a pen. He signed. He took the check and left without saying goodbye to his children. I stood in the parking lot after watching the exhaust blow into white air and felt something cold and empty and necessary at the same time. I don't know how to love him without condoning him. That's the problem I can't solve. I came back to France to find the mayor had been leaving notes with our postwoman. Word had gotten around that I'd worked in buildings and the commune wanted help restoring the old Lavier by the stream before it fell in on itself. It was the first time anyone here had asked me to build something without a spreadsheet attached. We sat in the mairie with bad coffee and worse fluorescent lighting and drafted a plan. Local stone, local masons volunteer weekends, a discreet plaque naming the mason who did the vaulting 6 years ago, instead of the donor who paid for the lime. I called the supplier I used to argue with and asked for a deal on chalks. He laughed and sent 2 pallets grumbling the whole time. I bit my tongue about moral ambiguity. Sometimes you just take the line and say thank you. Odette supervised. She sat on a folding chair and shouted advice at the mayor about joints. People from the village came with gloves and jokes, and for 2 Saturdays in a row, I forgot the internet existed. My wife, who was born a city person and became some kind of benevolent rural machine in under a year, organized sandwiches. A neighbor I nodded at 4 months told me about his father hiding wine barrels in that very lavoir when the Germans came through. He said it like he was telling me where he kept his socks. That's the thing this place does to me. It makes me understand that the work I've done, the glass, the concrete, the speeches about sustainable sourcing, only means anything if it sits in something older than my ambition. It wasn't all pastoral. The preemption office tried to block us on a technicality, claiming historic servitude across our back garden needed reopening so the wine grower uphill could bring his tractor through. I went 5 round with the architect's desk B. Tim Timids to France about newest shutters. This country can bury you in paper and then asked why your hands are dirty. In the end, Odette marched into the mairie with a folder of photos from 1952 showing the original access path running along the stream nowhere near us, and the mayor squinted, muttered, and stamped. The tractor now passes behind the fence where the brambles are thickest, which is where it always should have been. My mother tried to worm back in through a mutual acquaintance. I blocked her. My father sent a postcard with a drawing of a beach on it, thinking of you. Life it is short. I put it in the tin trunk with the ration cards. If on a supporting character in their drama, as I once wrote, I bowed and left the stage. The kids came to stay with us for a week during the school holidays. They played hide-and-seek under the walnut tree. Odette taught them to cut an apple so the seeds fall out like stars. My sister-in-law stood at the kitchen sink and cried into a dish towel quietly, the way people cry when they've been loud too long. I handed her a glass of water and didn't say anything because there was nothing to fix in that moment. The mortgage is in her name now. A house is hers. I'm still paying for the mess I offered to pay for, and I don't regret it. Work has crept back in through the side door. A small town nearby wants to turn their unused school into a clinic and apartments. I told them I'm not a firm anymore. They told me they didn't want a firm. They wanted someone who would pick up the phone at 7 a.m. When the roofer said the South Trust was powder, I said yes. I've been spending mornings in cold classrooms measuring windows that don't match each other by the same amount twice. It feels like starting over, and I like that. I'm not sure what that means for money yet. At night, Odette falls asleep in her chair and I carry her slippers to the foot of her bed. Before she closes her eyes, she says the same thing. The houses will outlast you. It sounds fatalistic. It isn't. It's permission to do the work and stop performing the performance of doing the work. Update 5. The school became a clock I woke up inside of. At 6:12 morning, the mayor called to say the South Classrooms Park had the bounce of a cheap trampoline. And by 8, I was kneeling with a headlamp peeling up vinyl tiles like old bandages off a sleeping animal. Wonderneath black adhesive that smelled faintly of ships and summers I didn't have. The diagnostic came, wrote Collinear on a form with a detached pity of a pharmacist. And then the sight froze. I stood in a room with a chalkboard that still said less fur Pronox and tried to explain negative pressure and containment to a roofer who had learned his trade from his grandfather and looked at me as if I were proposing to catch smoke in a sieve. We did it right. The damage team arrived in suits like astronauts with a unit that hummed like a polite refrigerator, and I watched them work the way I used to watch Blast Cut. Precise, nothing performative. All stakes the budget side, and protested. I went to the D department meeting, was my jacket still dusted in lime, and gave my stupid little speech about a clinic that would spare someone's mother a 40-minute drive in winter. A woman with a pen that clicked like Morse code stared at me over her mask and said we might be eligible for a line item. I had to pretend I understood. 2 weeks later, an email with too many attachments dropped in, and I realized I had accidentally become my own boat keeper. In the afternoons, a kid named Elo started showing up with his towel rolled in a dish towel. He has hair the color of the sky behind factories and the lightest hands I've seen in years. He is saving for a 205 GTI and none of us will let him die in. He taught me a new way to tuck a joint up under a warp sill, called it metamorse, and Odette shouted from her chair that if he called it that again, she wash his mouth with Vichy water. She has an opinion about every board in this village. We argue it about shutters with the Abbey if, and she won from the kitchen table by sending the mayor off with a stack of photos from 1957 where the original slats caught the light like fish. In between site meetings, hairline negotiations, and a running war with a supplier who swears the lime is fine if you know how to use it. Life in the house tilted. Odette asked me one evening if I could take her to town early because she wanted her hair set right, which is how you know you are entrusted with something you didn't ask for. On the way back, she told me matter of fact and staring at the road like it could blank that she had sewn side seams into coats that weren't hers in 1943 because people needed to hide papers in a place hands didn't go when they were searched. She didn't use the word clandestine. She said pratique. I told her I found another pencil line under the stair when I took down a piece of the skirting, an initial no one has any memory of, and she said the man who drew those lines had a laugh like a bicycle bell and left one November without his hat. We didn't go looking for his hat. That night, she ate 2 poached eggs and told my wife her olive oil was still an insult to olives. A week later, she dropped a glass in the scullery, and when I reached for her hand, the skin opened the need-useless petals. In the emergency room, the doctor called me Roch, and Odette called the doctor Petite, which he was not. We left with stir strips and a sheet of exercises for her fingers, and a date circled on the calendar for a check they recommended, and she dismissed. She died on a Tuesday, like the house had decided Tuesday was the day. I found her slippers parallel at the foot of the bed, the ribbon on her canvas suitcase tied like a thought. The palm's fun breast came with gestures practiced to the millimeter and a kindness that didn't insist on itself. The mayor sent flowers with a card that was too formal and exactly right. People from the village filtered and carrying tarts and anecdotes like tools. I put the ration cards and the postcard sheet hidden back in the tin trunk and hated the sound the lid made. The note called with a voice that could have read bedtime stories and told me there was a testimonial wrinkled and sure that left her singer machine and a pair of pearl-handled scissors to my wife, the postcards to the commu partim, and a sentence to me. Rand as Louis saw a respiration. Give it back its breath. The East Wing is ours now by law, but the room she slept in still smells faintly of loud during stubbornness, and I shut the door only when the sun hits the wall in the afternoon and makes the old plaster look like cream. The previous owner's nephew turned up in a sweater with elbow patches and suggested there must be some compensation, some residual right that clung like smoke to the curtains. The notaire adjusted his glasses and turned him into a polite memory. After the funeral, Lo came over with a Tupperware as if grief takes leftovers. He stood in the doorway of her room and said, "Lay." And I, ridiculous as ever, wanted to measure what straightness means. The clinic has a roof now where once there was only bravado in sky. We took the west wall apart stone by stone and put it back with a lintel that settles in your chest when you stand under it. The children of the village came one Saturday morning with little gloves and drew suns in the dust on the blackboard, and I almost told them about Odette's laugh when a joint went wrong, then realized I was already telling them by showing them where not to put their fingers. My sister-in-law brought my niece and nephew for the weekend, and they named the attic. It's Lennox Toils because of the apple seeds trick and the way dust looks in a shaft of light if you're 6. They fought over who got to sleep closest to the wall with a hairline crack that looks like a map of the lore. Their mother stood at the sink and dried a plate so thoroughly it squeaked and said without turning around that she's seeing someone who fixes bicycles. He is quiet, and his hands that I don't worry about around my niece and nephew. I said I don't need to meet him until she wants me to. The mortgage statements now read her name, and I file them like I'm putting away knives. My brother resurfaced in a text message from a number I didn't recognize. A photo of a beach I think was taken off a wall calendar, and 3 sentences that started with, "You never." I didn't answer. It's not a moral stance. It's the only way I know to keep a flower under our feet. My father sent another postcard with a drawn pelican this time. I put it next to the first in the trunk without ceremony. My mother found a way to tell a neighbor she had always liked me best. I watched the neighbor choose to keep that to herself until he decided not to, which is what communities do. Do they hold things until someone's arms get tired? And then in a neat private corner, the kind of thing that happens in novels, and makes me suspicious of novels, happen in our life. My wife took a test while I was at the Mary arguing about a downspout. And when I came home, she didn't say anything. She just put the little white steak next to my coffee like a stirrer and waited. I stared at it the way I stare at foundations as if I could read a future in a line. I felt joy arrive late like a bus you don't trust until it's at the curb and the doors open. I also felt something ancient and mean stand up in me with a list of all the ways I could fail. We went for a walk along the stream, where the lover now sits with its head held correctly, and I told her I was afraid of being my parents. She told me I wasn't not because I was good, but because I was tired of performing good. That distinction made more sense to me than anything he has in a long time. We sat on the wall and watched the tractor take the path behind the fence, where it always should have been. And I realized Odette's sentence had already started working on me. The house is breathing. My days are full of old wood and new paper and arguments with functionaries and men who think lime can do anything and it can't. At night, I sit at the kitchen table with the old plants from 1894 and a pencil sharp enough to make the thinnest line a human hand can make. And I draw what we are going to build where there used to be a corridor full of children. I am not sure yet how the money will work. I am more sure of my hands than I've been in years. I carry Odette's slippers to the foot of her bed out of habit, and then I put them back in the pocket, which is its own kind of prayer. The houses will outlast us. That's the point. Update 6. The river climbed the steps of the lavoir like it had a memory to check against. A southwesterly rolled in with the kind of rain that leans, and by midday the stones we just pointed were taking a baptism I hadn't scheduled. The mayor called with his voice already in his boots, and by the time I got down there, you could hear the stream talking in a register that makes men invent new swear words. We stacked sandbags as if that would convince water to negotiate. It didn't, but it slowed its temper. The vault held. The water filled and spilled the way a lung works if you don't panic it. The only casualty was a stack of flyers for the inauguration someone still insists we should have. They bled their ink onto the floor and turned themselves into a map of nothing. I felt absurdly proud of a wall. Back at the school, the roofer reported 3 tiles gone in a ridge that had opinions about weather. We climbed up after the gust light. Hugh approached a recently woken dog hand's open voice low. Elle tied off without being told and handed up tiles with that shy competence he keeps pretending is accidental. When we came down, a white van was parked sideways across the gate, and 2 people in bright vests were explaining that ENRA had triggered prevention of archaeology on the South Trench because someone's grandmother remembered finding a Roman coin there as a girl. I wanted to say that someone's grandmother remembers everything in this town and is not wrong often enough to be dismissed. But we all have our uniforms. They open a square, and in the second spit out came a shard the collar of overripe apricots with a fingernail track still visible in it. Kegelasher's bread. Work paused in the most civilized way you can pause. Work with a folding table, a pot of coffee that could have hauled a tractor, and a brief lecture about tile manufacturing in the 2nd century. We moved the line of the drainage 10 centimeters, and the archaeologist who had an earring so small was almost a confession, smiled like I passed a test I didn't know I was taking. It means my slab weights. It means that when you sit to have your blood pressure taken one day, you will also be sitting over a flower that remembers a hotter kill than ours. I adjusted my drawings and didn't pretend the delay wasn't expensive, then went home and put my hands into a board of walnut I'd been saving for no reason until now. The walnut came from a tree that used to shade a man who can no longer lift his own coffee. And I thought making a cradle from it would be tidy. It wasn't. There were worm runs in a heart and a twist along the grain that would have taught me humility if anything else hadn't. I planed and cursed and saved what could be saved. A neighbor offered 2 planks of cherry he'd been hoarding for a staircase he'll never build, and I took them like a penitent. I drew a radius for the rockers with the same bowl I use for soup. I cut the mortises by hand to slow my hands down. I sanded until the edges felt like things that knew they were touched. I kept stopping to check a half-moon of white plastic with a faint pink line on it, like it might have changed its mind while I wasn't looking. We went to the first chirography, and there was a grainy heartbeat like a bird tapping inside a jar. I've never been so grateful for a technician who didn't make eye contact, and for my wife's hand finding mine without theatrics. On the way back, we bought a pack of the good butter and a jar of the correct mustard because superstition needs prop as much as religion does. At home, I laid the cherry boards on the benches and felt my brain make space where a fear had been squatting. The department sent 3 more emails with attachments that multiplied if you looked at them directly. I spent an afternoon in the Mary with my sleeves pushed up, a calculator, and the mayor's reading glasses on my nose because his were closer than mine. The woman from the region who clicks her pen like she's telling secrets finally said the phrase, "Subvention el chi," in a tone that meant this was as much luck as it was merit. I said mercy and didn't add anything about morals. The ABF came back about signage, and the shade of white allowed further clinic corridors as if you can codify the temperature of calm. We'll paint them a white that has a little milk in it. I don't win these arguments, I just lose them into a color I can live with. My sister-in-law brought the kids and the man who fixes bicycles. His name is Ramin, and his hands do not make me worry. He stowed in the yard and adjusted a brake so it stopped squealing like a bad night, and I realized, quiet is measurable if you set the right instrument against the right noise. He doesn't try to be liked. The children like him. That is enough metric. We walked down to the stream and pretended to be experts about fish we didn't see, which is a good way of letting a child narrate their own day. Back at the sink, my sister-in-law rinsed lettuce as if she were trying to get a story off each leaf. She's learning to be a person who isn't only someone else's emergency. I handed her a towel and she dried the bowl with deliberation and said, "Ela by not waiting for me to consecrate it." A man in a sweater with elbow patches came back with a handwriting and he wanted me to read as if law could be cured by penmanship. He asked again about Odette singer softer this time as if the machine might hide behind me and he hoped I give her up to spare her embarrassment. The notary had already made the testament do its small magic. My wife put the scissors and the sanger on the table and let his eyes understand he wasn't being refused. He was being placed in the line of things the dead had decided. He left holding nothing, and I felt sorry for him almost to the end of the drive. Grief can make a thief. It can also make a neighbor. He waved once, and it was not sarcastic, which is something. My father stopped sending postcards. A gen from a town with a name that sounds like a song called to say there had been a heart a beach, a bench a passerby. I didn't fly anywhere. I sent a wreath that didn't pretend it knew him. I went to the workshop and stood with my hand on the cradle's rail and told the empty room, I was sorry we broke each other the way we did. I do not know if that sentence lands anywhere. Maybe language just evaporates and what's left is whether or not you return phone calls. My mother left a message via someone else that she would like to see the baby when it arrives. I removed the battery from the kitchen cordless and put it back in wrong on purpose. Some refusals need choreography. On site, the archaeologist found a coin after all. 3rd century. The face worn down until it looked like a thumbprint cast in bronze. He let me hold it flat on my palm, and for a second, the idea that all of this is new felt ridiculous. We cut a small panel into the corridor wall and set a niche with a glass front where the coin and a tile fragment will sit with a typed card, done, and a font the ADIF will allow. It's performative. It's also true. The school will become a place where you wake for bad news, and you will also look at a small round piece of metal that outlasted men who thought they were the point. The temp key took a shutter off the kitchen that we had been pretending was fine. It wasn't. Alo and I hung a new pair that actually closes without threatening your fingers. He passed some exam he swore he hadn't studied for, and arrived one morning with a grin so sideways, it had to be honest, and a new to him 2005, that starts like it means it. He parked at angles until my wife taught him to reverse, like she teaches breathing with your jaw unclenched. Odette would have called him a donkey and then kissed the crown of his head when he turned away. When we put the shutters up, she would have approved by insulting the color, and I realized I had stopped hearing her voice like an ache and started hearing it like a tool you reach for without looking. We held no inauguration for the lavoir. People just started using it. A woman rinsed a sprig of thyme there and left a thank you in the form of gossip I didn't need. A boy on a scooter flaked water at his friend and was surprised by how cold history can be, especially in June. The mayor came by with a bottle of warm CR Man at 4 in the afternoon, and I took a sip because refusal would have been a speech. He told me there will be elections next spring and looked at me the way men look at other men when they are assigning chores disguised as honors. I told him I get hives from fluorescent lighting and minutes written in the margin with a square. He laughed and said that was unfortunately the job. At night, the house breathes quietly through the old lime and the new glass, and I swear you can't hear the way to the east wing, sitting easier on its stones. I keep the singer covered with a tea towel the way Odette did. The cradle waits by the radiator with a patience that makes my chest go hot and then cold and then hot again. The first cake was a tap like someone testing a wall with a knuckle. We laid there in the blue of the not yet morning and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to fix. I went down to the workshop later and played the last whisper off the rockers until the shadings came off like ribbon. I do not know how we will sleep, or if the clinic will hit its dates, or if the Regent's pen will click yes one more time. I do know that when the river rose, it told us who we are to it, and when the tile came out of the ground, it told us who we aren't. The rest, I'm building one joint under a warp sill at a time until the rooms we live inside of and the rooms we make for other people both remember how to take a breath without being told.